Hello and welcome to my dungeon. I have recently and finally played Death in Space and immersed myself in the shrinking universe the game is set in. But searching around the internet for more adventures, I didn't find a lot of first or third-party content. I feel like the game is dying a silent death, alone in the dark vacuum of the internet. Since I feel that would be a sad fate for this little sci-fi gem of a game, I decided to revisit it with this video and do a deep dive into the system, into the lore, and tell you what makes it so special. If you like this video and topics like this interest you, please give it a thumbs up down below and consider subscribing to my channel. The channel is almost up to 900 subscribers and it would be amazing if we could reach 1000. Thank you. The first aspect I want to focus on is the question, is Death in Space just Merkborg in space? The rulebook has not the sheer art project madness of Johan Nor's work on Merkborg or Cyborg. It is still very stylish in its own right, but it's much more conventional overall. So while it does not make the same impression as Merkborg, it makes up for that in readability and usability. The rules are similar in that they both are minimalistic D20 rollover systems, but where Merkborg is completely player-facing, with players rolling for attack, defense, and armor absorption, for example, Death in Space is a bit more conventional, with both the players and the GM rolling. For example, you have a passive armor class, systems to roll attack against, rather than absorption armor. Furthermore, Death in Space does not have classes, not even optional ones. Where the unique and flavorful classes, like the esoteric hermit or the heretical priest, are a huge draw for the Merkborg system, Death in Space puts more emphasis on a character's background and their place in the world. Death in Space characters only get very little special skills during character creation. Most of what the characters can do is represented through their ability, through their equipment, and through roleplay. Also, the characters start with very little equipment and likely with no cosmic mutations that would give them any special powers. Both of these have to be acquired through the course of the game. It's a minimalistic system, very easy to handle, very hackable. For example, the game only knows a default difficulty of 12 to roll skill checks against. You can modify these rolls by giving it advantage or disadvantage, but the game doesn't know any other difficulty. Now, you could easily modify this, and the GM could set the DC like in standard D&D, or you could embrace it and only let the characters roll on important and difficult tasks, keeping dice rolling to a minimum and focus on the narrative and the player creativity. That's how I run the game. I mean, a DC of 12 is a hard check. It's with an above average skill bonus of 2, a character will only have a 50% chance of succeeding in that check. So it is those situations where I care to roll. If I'm like, oh, that's hard what you're doing, that's probably not going to work, I'd rather have the players try something else. And if I'm like, yeah, that's easy, you'll probably succeed, I don't have them roll, I just let them succeed. But if I'm ambivalent, I'm like, yeah, that might succeed, might not, I'm happy to let the dice decide the fate and the flow of the narrative. That's when I want the players to roll, and that is a DC of 12 in Death in Space. The game also doesn't know any levels. Neither does Merkborg, strictly speaking, but in Merkborg you get better in big steps. Raising your stats or lowering your stats, rolling for hit points and getting bonus stuff like spells all at once in one big step, in one level basically. In Death in Space, on the other hand, you buy character advancement directly with the experience points, and the players decide what aspect of their character they want to improve and when they want to improve it. The setting of Death in Space is also vastly different than Merkborg. I mean, past the obvious differences, one is a fantasy game, the other is a sci-fi game after all, but the overall tone of Death in Space is a bit more serious and not as balls to the walls crazy doom metal as Merkborg is. So no, Death in Space is not Merkborg in space. Though there are some similarities in theme that I will get back to later in the video. The second question I want to ask is Death in Space a horror game, like the name might suggest? There are just 2 pages with tables for monsters in the rules, just as many as there are pages for cults, drugs, weapons and armor, or spacecraft. The rules might be deadly, even more deadly than Merkborg in fact, with limited HP and only a single death save and no way to mitigate damage. You can't even spend void points to mitigate damage like you can spend omens in Merkborg. You can only spend void points to gain advantage on a roll or to activate cosmic mutations. But that just means that the characters are no superheroes. They're just normal human beings. You can run a scenario like Alien or Event Horizon perfectly well in the system, but the default setting and introduction adventure from the core rules does not focus on the horror aspect of space travel more than any other aspect of space travel. You could just as well run a scenario like Firefly or The Expanse. I'd say Death in Space is actually more of a all-around space system like Traveler, though it has a focus towards the low-power spectrum of space. There are no huge ships, no huge crews, no navies, no huge battles. This is definitely more Cowboy Bebop than it is Star Trek. What makes Death in Space special and what sets it apart from other space games is its punk attitude and nihilism. What I mean with punk in the context of Death in Space is an anti-corporation, anti-authority and anti-waste attitude that can be found throughout the game. In the world of this, a devastating corporate war driven by corporate greed has destroyed the entire economy throughout the universe. It only ended with the collapse of the big corporations, bringing an end to complex supply chains and manufacturing of new goods. Now, people have to scrape by with what is already there. Everything has to be maintained, repaired, and repurposed for as long as possible. Big corporations started the war, but it is the people who are suffering the consequences. Now, every authority is a cult, a warlord or something. Illegitimate, inept, corrupt, and most likely all 3. Looking in the book, the only larger groups that are described are 2 pages of cults. No description of nations, governments, or corporations whatsoever. Though there are a handful of groups, mostly companies, described on the standalone map of the Tenebris system. Since the war disrupted complex supply chains and devastated the economy, almost all production of new goods has stopped. From weapons and everyday goods to computers and spacecraft. You can't get new stuff. Everything has to be maintained, repaired, and repurposed for as long as possible. People just can't afford to throw away anything. Imagine how angry you would be with an iPhone that is by corporate intent designed to be impossible to repair if you could not buy a new one, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. And you had to keep that iPhone running for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And work extra hard to find workarounds for this anti-repair design. Death in Space has an entire page dedicated to repair rules, which is a lot in a rules minimal system like this. The space travel rules also give you the option to decide how much fuel you want to spend for space travel to speed it up. It's not a fixed number of fuel you have to expend to get from point A to point B, but it's a strategic decision you have to make. Do you expend fuel or do you expend time? Characters start with barely any equipment or money. If you hope to survive in the shrinking universe, you have to be frugal with your dwindling resources. You have to save on fuel, you have to save on ammo, and maintain and repair everything. Now, nihilism. Here is a similarity to Merkborg, but also a difference. In Merkborg, the world is ending soon, very soon in fact, and you roll on the calendar of Necrobil every day for new miseries and the inevitable end of the world. Everything your characters do, everything they achieve is actually doomed to die together with the rest of the world in just a few days or maybe months. In Death in Space, the universe has stopped expanding and is instead shrinking at an accelerated rate. So everything will end in the fury of the Big Crunch, the anti-Big Bang. Now that sounds bad at first, but if you think about it for a minute, you will realize that the universe is an unfathomable big place and will take billions and billions of years until the shrinking of the universe actually becomes noticeable. Actually, our universe, our real universe we are living in, is similarly doomed. The sun will expand in a few million years, burning the Earth to a crisp. The Andromeda galaxy will collide with the Milky Way, and everything will end in inevitable heat death, or maybe the Big Rip. But those timescales are just beyond human comprehension, and more importantly, they are beyond human existence. It just does not matter. Not in our universe, not in Death in Space. It just doesn't matter. It's kind of setting the mood in Death in Space, however. In this shrinking universe, humanity has already conquered the stars. Not just the solar system or the Milky Way, but with their faster and light travel of the bridging drives, humanity has spread throughout the entire universe, up to the very edge. There is nowhere left to go. There's no way to escape this world. Even though this is a space game, and the opportunities and resources in space should be endless, they are not. In fact, they are dwindling. And I think this is a nice parable for our own situation here on Earth. The resources on Earth are limited. And if you try to get toilet paper or a new graphics card in 2020, you might even think that the resources are already dwindling, that the world is shrinking and inevitable doom is just around the corner. Now, imagine that feeling, but imagine you can't even look up to the stars and hope to settle on Mars. That is Death in Space. I mean, on a cosmic scale, everything anyone has ever done or will ever do is ultimately pointless. The universe is just so stupendously huge in space and in time that nothing matters. Death in space is really driving that point home. Since in the shrinking universe you can't look outward for hope, people are looking inward for hope. Which explains why there are 2 pages of cults. But from our perspective, all of these cults are complete nutcases. Imagine being so lost and so hopeless that you would willingly join one of these cults. Still, I feel that Death in Space is actually more optimistic than Mörkborg, which is nihilistic to a comedic level. Not everything is doom and gloom in Death in Space, nor is it in our own universe for that matter. On a cosmic scale, nothing might matter, but if you come down to a human scale, focusing on the fate of small groups of people and individuals, suddenly everything matters. And that is what Death in Space does. It draws the focus back from the cosmic scale, or even the world scale. No nations, no corporations, no big heroes. Death in Space focuses on the action of everyday people. That is why the game gives the PCs the option to own a piece of a space station rather than a spacecraft. That option draws the focus even more into that limited location with returning NPCs and long-term interpersonal drama. That's how Deep Space Nine was different from the next generation of Star Trek. By focusing on this home base, the characters have to face the consequences of their actions on a personal scale. And that is also the beauty of the introductory adventure Welcome to the Ring. It's not about terrifying aliens or some strange cosmic phenomena. It's about your group trying to get their ship fixed. All the conflict, all the struggle might be small scale, but it's all personal and very human. On this human scale, we can find hope and beauty, even in a shrinking universe. We can help grow a garden next to a nuclear reactor and share a bowl of soy noodles with Tachyon with Roy at the noodle stand. The characters can help bridge the gap between puzzle and parliament and bring 2 old friends back together. They can fix their ship and fly off with Hina Tsurutsuru towards new adventures, or they can stay with their hub, docked at Aurum 80, and can continue their life and their everyday adventures on the Iron Ring. Death in space might be inevitable, but that doesn't mean that everything is pointless. What matters is how you get there. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time. I really hope this works. I just recorded this whole video, and then when I wanted to start editing, I found out there was no sound. So, let's try again.